All right, can you hear me? Okay, so my story is not your immediate image of combat or conflict. I didn't serve in combat, but my time in the military certainly had its share of conflict. It was 1979. I went into the Navy right after I graduated from high school in a small town in Indiana, which I was very happy to get out of. I didn't have money for college, but school was where I excelled and where I belonged, and I felt like somebody. So I knew I needed a sense of purpose and I needed a direction in my adult life. I had come from a split family. I had two sets of parents. Both my father and my stepfather were alcoholics, and my stepmother literally hated me from the day she met me. I was 2 years old. My dream was to be a child psychologist because I thought I could save the children. I ultimately decided on the Navy because the recruiter came to my high school one day and said, "Join the Navy and see the world." So I did. It was my ticket out of Indiana, and I did get to see parts of the world that I really never dreamed at that point that I'd get to see because I'd never been on an airplane. I'd hardly been out of Indiana. And I was actually stationed in a place I didn't even know existed. Doesn't say much for the Indiana school system, but. So I was always fighting for the underdog. That started early. As a stepchild, I was the underdog. So I had to learn to fight early. So the Navy didn't teach me that, but it certainly gave me a platform to fight for myself and for others. And I learned early that I needed to do that for female veterans. Early on in my experience, there were two types of men in the military, the grandfathers and the fathers who would put their arms around you and say, "You can't do that, you're a girl. You can't do that, you're a female." What would my wife think? Don't do that. Then the young men who thought the only reason women went in the military was to be promiscuous. I wanted nothing to do with either one of those scenarios. I really wanted to stand on my own and be recognized for my own merits. And constantly being told you can't only fueled me to fight harder. After I graduated basic training, I was actually chosen to be an assistant company commander, which is what the Navy called their drill instructors. So I went from being the recruit and being conditioned into military life to actually being the person conditioning the recruits. And I learned then that I had a gift for helping others that were struggling, particularly female veterans. From Orlando, I went to Iceland in 1980. I was 19 years old. I didn't know Iceland existed. Had no idea where they were sending me. I had to choose my designation. I'd gone in the Navy with no actual occupation. That's how desperate I was to get out of Indiana. And so I had to choose my occupation. And they said, "You can't be on a submarine, you're a girl. You can't be on a radar plane, you're a girl. You can't do this, you can't do that, because you're a girl." Not because I wasn't smart enough, not because I wasn't strong enough, not because I wasn't mentally tough enough, but simply because I was a female. I ultimately chose data processing, which at the time was a mix between HR and IT. Computers were just getting up and running, which served me well. But adding to this conflict was the atmosphere and environment of an isolated duty station. So Iceland is an island in the middle of the ocean, and at the time, the locals did not want us there. So they would protest us being there. So there were a lot of restrictions for leaving the base. And I was junior enlisted, so there were even more restrictions on me leaving the base. So I didn't go anywhere very often. I was stationed there for 2 years. I went home one time. Remember, this is 1980, 1982. There's no internet, there's no email, there's no cell phones. I got to call home maybe once a month, maybe once every other month, and talk for about 5 minutes. It is where I learned to say "I love you" as the last thing I say to my family when I say goodbye, because there were several times when I didn't get to say "I love you" and didn't get to talk to them again for another month. Exactly. So adding to this is in Iceland, there's 6 months of near darkness, and then there's 6 months of near light all the time. So that atmosphere was a lot of conflict and figuring out how to sleep through that. And the frigid temperatures, I think the high was like 40 degrees in Iceland when I was stationed there. So there's not a lot to do. And so when you're there, it's either work or partying. The men on deployment there in the P3 squadrons were away from their wives and their families. And when they weren't on a mission tracking submarines, we were at the bar. So insecure female, men on a hall pass, lots of alcohol, not a good combination. My life in the military was not without professional accomplishments. I did actually achieve a lot, which I'm very proud of. Navy commendations, Navy Achievement Medal, rapid advancement. I did go from E3 to E7 in 8 years, and I also applied for an officer program. My big goal, I'm going to be an officer and change the Navy. Talk about an underdog fight, right? From Iceland, I went to Jacksonville, Florida, Brunswick, Maine, where my beautiful daughter was born, who became my world and remains that today. Love you. I found myself stationed in Pearl Harbor in 1987, where I had created yet another advocacy group. It was something I had done in every duty station before that, and it was a safe harbor for female veterans to go, to just get supported, to talk through things that were happening to them. And it was there one day I vividly remember a female service member came up to me. She was struggling, addicted to alcohol, and she said, I need help, and I trust you. And because of our advocacy group, she was able to get help, and we were able to keep her in the Navy. I can still see her face, and I can still gives me goosebumps and can bring me to tears. I could relate to her on so many levels. My own struggles with alcohol, my own struggles with being a female in the military, and just a lot of things. Again, isolated on an island. After 3 years, I didn't go home at all. My family came to visit once, so just a lot of isolation. And I needed those advocacy groups as much as they and she needed me. So my time in the military became a time of advocacy for me to be able to help others, to stand up for their successes, to help them through their troubles and their challenges. And the advocacy groups that I was a part of creating really formed who I am today in civilian life as an advocate for veterans, fighting for their skills recognition and helping them get into careers with a new purpose. In fact, I started my company, Veterans Ascend, to do just that, fight for the recognition of skills for the veterans, help them get into those new careers, ensure that they are recognized for those skills, and ensure that those who've served our country still belong to something great and feel valued for what they bring to the table. Thank you.